Wow, guys, Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance is, as it stands right now, my game to beat this year. I don't know if I'll run into another game that comes out this year that I'm enjoying as much as this one. I played 8 to 10 hours of Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne on PS2, but lost interest at that time. The visuals at that time were looking kind of plain to my eyes, not as much detail as others on the PS2 at that time. Wasn't really into the monster collecting. It was my first time doing that kind of thing, but my tastes have changed quite a bit, and I'm really enjoying the HD remaster of Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne right now. And I also played a few hours of Strange Journey on DS, also an SMT game, but I'm only going to make comparisons to Nocturne. That's the one that's most fresh in my mind and that I've played the most of. But the premise for SMT 5 Vengeance is there's this cataclysmic event that ends the world as we know it, leaving a desolated, strange, and hollow remnant of what it once was, or what the world once was, populated sparsely by supernatural creatures. And you mysteriously survive and are trying to make your way in this new world and hopefully rescue a classmate who was whisked away by one of these creatures. The gameplay is not identical to, but very similar to grid-based, turn-based, just the dungeon crawl with a party of adventurers or heroes or whatever. Nocturne has some frustrating JRPG elements that make progression through the main story a mystery, kind of requiring a walkthrough. Oh, I have to go talk to this person again, to avoid frustration. That's what I'm finding. But Vengeance has none of that so far, and I'm loving it so much that I actually wanted to stop playing it so it wouldn't sour me on Nocturne before I finished that game. I just bought that on sale a few months ago. I had been enjoying it, and I didn't want to be soured on it, and thankfully it didn't. I think I pulled out of Vengeance in time, but I played 5 hours of Vengeance on Xbox Series X specifically, so these are first impressions based on early gameplay only, but I'm also going to touch on thematic elements later from a Christian perspective, and hopefully you'll find that interesting. It's as RPGs go, a large world seemingly, but fairly linear. So like a big, super wide, but still linear path in the world as you're exploring, instead of, I think so far, dungeons. That's what I really know from Nocturne is like the overworld, not much happens there. You can have some combat encounters, but really you use the overworld to go from one dungeon to the next. And that's not what I'm experiencing so far. It's very much you're wandering the world and having your combat and stuff out there in the world. And it is very combat focused. There are some cutscenes and some walking around and talking to people early on, but it very soon switches to a combat focus, just pushing forward, trying to get from one ley line portal, I think they're called, to the next. Instead of towns, each of these portals is what gives you access to being able to heal and being able to resupply. So you're pushing your luck, as it were, or pushing your supplies between the portal you just discovered and the next one that you may discover along the way. So it's got some of that same vibe as a dungeon crawler where you're like, okay, how far can my resources get me before I need to maybe turn back? I'm not seeing another portal here. I think I need to turn back now and use the supplies I have remaining to get back to the portal, heal up, and then try again, And I really love that classic mechanical structure of dungeon crawls that push your luck in terms of your consumable supplies, how much mana, how many spells you have that are going to last until the next safe place to rest and recover. And of course you're acquiring monsters along the way, which is kind of like getting loot, and you're using those to kind of upgrade your party's capabilities. Monsters almost all of them have some kind of elemental weakness. There's a multitude of elements. And when you take advantage of those weaknesses in combat, you kind of get a bonus turn. And I believe it's called the press turn system. I kind of think of it as the press advantage system. You get an advantage and you get the chance to press the advantage, because it's kind of like you hit them so hard they get knocked back and you get to do a little bit more than you would have otherwise. And these weaknesses are discovered, as far as I can tell now, by trial and error, basically. You hit it with lightning, and then when you highlight that monster to select it in combat, it's going to show that it's weak to lightning if it was weak, or strong, or neutral, or whatever. And so over time, as you fight these monsters and try different things, you permanently unlock knowledge of their weaknesses or their strengths. And then those things are all revealed when you're highlighting the enemy as a possible enemy to select in combat. The animations in combat are a little longer than Nocturne, which I would be hesitant about because I like the snappy animations and let's just keep the combat going, as opposed to the Final Fantasy games that got these big, huge, long animation sequences that were cool the first one or two times, but eventually started getting old, Well, no, although the animations here are a little bit longer, you can tap A as soon as they start, whether it's an attack animation or a spell animation, and it'll skip the animation. They're so short that it's not even worth skipping sometimes, but sometimes you'll maybe want to do something between the full watching of the animation and using the auto battle mode, which is also selectable at pretty much any time in combat, and you can choose an auto battle mode that just does straight attacks and one that will also incorporate skills. And that really flies by much faster than you could get through the combat just by hammering the A button. And so there are these different gradations of pacing that you have control over, and I love that. That is the sweet spot. That's the beauty of turn-based RPGs, when they realize that people might want to do this, that sometimes when you're fighting an enemy that's a little bit more complicated, you're less familiar with them, you're going to think about your turns a little more carefully. But when you are fighting against something you obviously outmatch, then you can just fly through that combat really fast and skip all, anything that might be boring. Or you can even change it up. So like, say you're getting through, you got 5 enemies, and you're like, I wonder how this is going to go. Then you get down to 2 of them, you're like, okay, I think I'm good for the rest of this fight. Then you just hit the auto battle and it's done, So really this is probably the best pace control in any turn-based RPG that I've ever played. I love it. I absolutely love it. The upgrades that you can get for your main character or the monsters that join your party are introduced progressively as you unlock more of these kind of ley line portals. You get more ideas tutorialized to you, and you can get passive upgrades to your stats on every time you level up. That's just kind of automatic. But you also get a stat point to spend on one of your key attributes. There's not a ton of them, but that can still help you mold your character to suit your playstyle. Are you going to go more magic heavy? Are you going to go more just straight up attack heavy? Do you want to mostly focus on defense and just being able to last, or do you want to do a lot of damage when you hit? You can also graft skills from monsters onto your character or onto monsters in your party, which really just allows this great skill customization. So really enticing the way that you can upgrade your characters, despite there not really being any kind of loot system. It's still kind of there. It's just represented in a different way thematically than getting loot and adding that to your character. No, instead you are getting these attributes from monsters that you kill that you can graft onto your character. So it scratches a very similar itch if you make that connection, and then you can feel that sense of growth. Monsters can also be fused together to make better monsters, as in previous games in the SMT series, and the system for doing that includes the option to supply copies of monsters for fusion that you've previously had in your party but are long gone because they got turned into other monsters, or you just let them go, or whatever. If you go and register them in this kind of library record book type thing, can't remember what it's called, then anytime you want to fuse a monster, out of several and use that monster as one of them, you can. And so you also get most or all info about what you will create before creating that monster. So you can figure out, is this really what I want? Is it going to be worth it to ditch these 2 monsters to get this one that's supposedly better? So there's way less risk involved, and experimentation with party composition is greatly encouraged and facilitated by the nature of how they handle this. Traversal and exploration in the world is rewarding and plentiful. There's little energy pellets that restore your health and your mana, and also a special power that you charge up for these special attack things. There are these soda machines that are just kind of left over in the post-apocalypse or whatever this is, that dispense these relics that one of the creatures will give you money for if you take them back and sell them to him. And then these soda machines will also, in time, refill themselves. So you can even go back to them and get more from there. There are treasure chests out on the map to find, and also invisible treasure chest, as it were. You can find this demon guide that will travel along with you and get your attention and point you to something they found, and then you can go over there, investigate. Usually it's something good. Sometimes it's, oh crap, it's a boss fight, we got tricked or whatever. There are these mystical rails of a sort that zip you around the map. Once you discover them, you just hit A, and then you don't know where it's going to take you, but it will take you to the same place every time. But the first time you go, you don't know where you're going to go. And it'll zip you around to this other location. I always feel like there are things to find and places worth checking out as I travel long-term to my ultimate destination. I just love moving around and checking stuff out in this game. As far as the visuals that you're checking out, man, I just find these monster designs to be entrancing and bizarre, and I found that to be the case with previous games in the series, but that really just becomes even more the case as they have more detail now. It's the tone, and I think this plays out in the monster design as well, is this sort of Japanese version of Lovecraftian, where like there's these supernatural, otherworldly realities that exist that were always hidden to us before, and now the world has been shattered by them, and we are discovering that they exist for the first time. And so it's almost kind of like this is the world that is left after Cthulhu comes and destroys everything or whatever, you know? It's a little bit like that. And so the monsters are weird. Some of them are whimsical, which I could do without, but most of them just have an oddness to them, a slight, even if there is some whimsy still, there's still like a little bit of a weirdness, a creepiness to them. And there is tons of monster variety. Really pleased with that. I love monster movies as you get exposed to like, what is this weird monster? How does it tick? What are its strengths and weaknesses? I got to figure this out, you know. And so there's a similar kind of fascination I had with all the monsters that you run into. Like, what the crap am I looking at? Could this, first off, how am I going to beat this? And then could it be a good member in my party? You know, if I could figure out how to make that happen. So, love all the monsters. There are really some beautiful spell animations in this game, even though they don't assume my interest. In other words, they don't last too long. And so I really appreciate that. I think it's running at 60 FPS. I'm not sure, but it feels very smooth. So it's probably 60 FPS. The visuals are still a little less detailed than other games, as they are really mimicking cel-shaded designs, I suppose. So it has a little bit of that anime vibe to it, but it's still much more detailed than Nocturne Remaster, more detailed than Dragon Quest XI. So even though it has some anime vibe to it, there's still a lot more detail than is typical in those cases. Really engaging to look at, I find, though with some designs that are definitely sexualized, it's worth noting. But speaking of kind of like some designs, something that I had to get used to is that your main character is a male character. He is referred to repeatedly as a young man, over and over again. But he looks like a girl to me in his design. They really emphasize his eyelashes. He's wearing these kind of flowery clothes, you know. And then when he goes into this other world that the world becomes, he gets this long, flowing, beautiful blue hair. And so I had to, so I kind of had to acclimate myself. Like, no, they're not trying. Even though to us Westerners, we might look at this and say, oh, they're doing some kind of a gender thing, or they're trying to feminize him or whatever. I'm just assuming there's something culturally that's being lost in translation. If I go back and watch, you know, some Chinese martial arts movies, some Japanese martial arts movies, you know, that are historical, you'll often see men that have their hair up in a bun and will otherwise have really long, beautiful, flowing long hair, you know. And so I'm just kind of like, okay, well, just kind of accept this, recontextualize this, and accept it as part of, at least to my ignorant Western eyes, just accept it as the oddness of the world and part of what's going on and all that. So I found myself really able to just accept it and move forward. I didn't think I would get over the big flowing blue hair because it's very prominent, but I was surprised. Like, yeah, no, I don't even care. I'm not getting any, you know, weird vibes off of this design anymore. There's some great quality of life stuff compared to, some of these are from the upgrade going from the Switch, which it was originally on, to this Vengeance version that's on modern consoles. So I don't know which ones are which necessarily, but you can save almost any time. That is not a thing common to a lot of classic JRPGs. You've got a quest marker and an objective description, also not something JRPGs are known for. You can put custom waypoints on the map. There's just none of the stumbling blocks of classic JRPGs getting in my way in this one, and I so appreciate that in its design. As far as the sound goes, well, I do not like anime, and it's largely because of the style, the overinflected voice acting, and just the strange noises that have become standard and I don't know, even wanted by fans of anime, at least that let's watch the dubs. I don't know. I have no idea. But I can't stand that stuff. I just want, I just want normal sounding people. And right off at this front, there's some narrators that, I was like, well, I don't know if these are disembodied ghosts or spirits or all-powerful beings or what they're supposed to be. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. I'm not quite feeling it. But a lot of the game isn't voiced anyway, and so when you walk up to somebody, you'll have a text show up of what they say, but like there'll be some introductory sign like, hey there, or what's up? I'm just like, oh no, I don't need that. And when they were voiced early on, you got a character, it's the teacher in a classroom. And like he was my first impression of what what is a normal person gonna sound like in this game? And the guy sounded like a DJ, or he just had that voice actor-y sound that is so common in anime and anime-based games. I'm like, I'm out. I can't do it. And what I found with this, and also in Nocturne Remaster, which I think added a bunch of voice acting or something, which there was a little bit, I listened to that, I was like, nope, I'm out. I find that in this game in particular, when I remove all the voice acting and just read the text, it adds to the creepy, desolate vibes that really the rest of the game is going for, and that I find the voice acting to intrude upon and counteract. So I would say if you're interested in everything I've said so far, but you don't like anime voice acting, just turn it off. Just turn it off and see what you feel, because it definitely works for me. I also turned the music down by nearly half. I found that at the default volume levels, the effects of like sword strikes and all those kinds of things, they didn't have the impact that I personally wanted. And just kind of got lost in the mix of the music quite a bit, but I turned the music down to nearly half of its starting volume, and that really did the trick. The music otherwise felt fitting to me for the mood and what I would expect, I guess, from Japanese and anime culture. So, no complaints really in that regard. So let's talk about those themes. The event seems to be the result of a conflict between supernatural creatures of order and of chaos. Words like demons, angels, and God are thrown around a lot, and some other Christian lingo as well now and then, but it's almost immediately obvious, I think, to Christians that are intentionally engaged in their faith that these are not the angels, demons, and God described in the Bible. And this is nothing new. Previous games in this series and other JRPGs and anime often use Christian terminology to describe what is really a much more Eastern or purely fictional mythology. In this case, this struggle between chaos and order, that's much more of an Eastern thing. That's not really something that you see at all in the Bible. And I was reminded, as I was kind of thinking through these things and their use of these terms, that I was reminded that possibly the most crucial, valuable question for meaningful exchange today, whether we're talking to someone in person or online, is the question, what do you mean by that? Whether we're using words like God, faith, and redemption, or words like liberal, truth, and woke, it's worth asking our conversation partners, what do you mean when you use the word blank? So much time gets wasted and unnecessary misunderstandings happen because we don't first clarify what we mean by the words we use before getting deep into sensitive topics with each other. And so often just asking, what do you mean, is the most valuable tool to help us understand someone else and their position, and also can help them to consider their own ideas before planting their flags too firmly and digging their heels in when suddenly they're being asked to elaborate on more precisely what they mean by the words and the ideas that they're sharing and expressing. So anyway, yeah, what do you mean by that was the question that really strikingly came to mind as I saw the use of all these different terms going on here. In summary, I haven't reviewed many games yet this year, just Wizardry, not Labyrinth of Lost Souls, Wizardry, whatever the big remake was, and Dragon's Dogma 2. But Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance is easily my game of the year so far. There is just nothing in it that is getting in the way of my enjoyment in the first 5 hours. I thought it might be my kind of game, but I never expected how much it would just feel great almost right away and just keep feeling better and more engaging after that. Now, as always, a lot can change as I get deeper in. But right now, it has the absolute strongest start for me compared to any game I've started playing this year. I'm forcing myself to play and finish Nocturne before buying this one. But even if it's not on sale when I come back to it, I will gladly pay full price to continue my journey in Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance. For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.